Want to talk about past life regression, future life progression, the recent development of between life regressions, which has been brought up to date by all the NDE videos that we see from people where they will talk about some of their experiences in the between life state. And also I will want to focus on the higher self. That's something I've been exploring for, at least since my second book, 2005, 2006. And it's important to understand as we pursue our astral experiences, whether in meditation or projection or lucid dreams, to understand that the discoveries that we make there, all of which are, relevant and useful on the inner journey, are somewhat trumped by, sorry to use that word, somewhat trumped by the experience, or whether you get it through a meditation or through reading of the higher self, because all our incarnate personalities are projections from higher self. Traditionally, in the older teachings, called the monad. And when we, even if only briefly, experience the consciousness of the higher self, we can spread our wings a little bit and grasp the enormity of what higher self experiences in terms of, let's say, 50, 100 projections. That's just a rough estimate. Some teachers will say it's far more than that. I tend to stick with about 100, because once you get even 100, that's 100 incarnate personalities throughout time and space. Not mostly on this planet, but certainly people have experiences on other planets as other types of beings. And once you get beyond that number, it gets like dizzying, and it's even dizzying if you get up to 50. In the book I'm going to quote from, You Are History. You are history, the soul, the higher self, and our share of divinity. I managed to, this was done in about 2011, 2012, published in 2015. I managed to track about 25 of past lives that I appear to be strongly connected to. And I explore how they influenced me, that's me, Gordon, right now, and how they influence each other. Because as you will hear, someone who passed in the 15th century and made reasonable spiritual progress in their incarnation was tipped to help other personalities from that same monad. And not everyone gets to do that, because some of the incarnate souls, suffer so much in their lives through abuse, through cruelty, through starvation, war, any number of things. They're not ready to do that sort of thing when they pass, but some are. And just one of the differentiations I can point to. And I feel that this is an incredibly important part of our inner journey. As I hinted in my introduction that Wendy put up before, the solace and love that we feel connecting to our dear departed, whether they've been gone 5 weeks or 50 years, is incredibly good, positive energy for the heart and soul. But, and certainly not to be denied or put aside as not so important. It is important. But I do feel that connecting to the higher self and experiencing at least a little of what it lives in a very much higher vibration, of course, is an expansion of our understanding of our limited self that we feel. Doing that, we can explore and the experiences and the epochs and the personality issues of those past lives where they may have been hemmed in by poverty, hard work, religion, political repression, uh, all that sort of thing. We talk about plagues and tornadoes and earthquakes, and it would feel like we are, because of technology, better able to cope. And I would say generally we are, but those recent floods and storms in places like Florida and Virginia and Carolina, where, I turn on YouTube and I look at a river and I'm thinking, okay, it's a river. And then I see a house floating by on the river. And, I read the sort of things that we've all read. And I think, well, can we cope with the destructions of Mother Nature any better than we did 500 years ago? We can certainly reconstruct faster, but I do think we're still, how shall we say, the slaves of the whims of Mother Nature. And to that, many of you might add, well, we're slaves to the whims of despots and generals and dictators who, you know, start and stop wars pretty much at their whim, or their desire to be prideful rulers of little empires. But I digress. Let me do a little quote from More Adventures in Eternity from about 2005, where I first tried to deal with higher self. Now, I know some of you have participated in discussions in Facebook groups, because I've done it myself and I've seen your names, contrasting how higher self experiences all incarnations simultaneously, whereas you and I, as humans in time and space, tend to see it as an educative process in a linear form, going forward from, say, ancient Greece to ancient Rome to the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. You know what I'm talking about. So I've got a paragraph here where I want to try and sum that up. In a sentence, higher self sees things one way, while the incarnate personality sees things another way. Will there be a blending of perspectives? Well, I sure hope so. Physical Gordon has been chiseling out his response for years. The progress report looks like this. As the incarnate personality continues to expand, its perceptions overflow their original dimension. What was once defined by space, a body, becomes defined by time, many bodies. What was once defined by physical plane reality, inevitable extinction, becomes redefined by astral plane reality, apparent immortality, and then further refined by higher self contact, eternity experienced in a huge variety of self-engineered limitations. And as a result, the one-track mind becomes the multi-dimensional being. And I'm still rather proud of that, because it's an incredibly complex situation. So to be able to put it into a paragraph, I thought, hey, that's good. And as you can see, I'm still quoting it from 20 years later. So keep that in mind. I know you all have thoughts and dream experiences of multidimensionality, even if it's only a little snippet here and there. You know what I'm talking about. And even if you're lucid dreaming about your, oh, I don't know, deceased grandchild or deceased grandfather, if you're with them, you're already participating in multidimensionality. You're out of your physical and you're in the astral, if it, only for 5 minutes. So that to me is your first little bite on the taste of multidimensionality. So for me, past life regression opens that up big time. And I know some of you have had one or two or three past life regression experiences, maybe vivid, maybe not so vivid. And we've all read about them, seen videos where people talk about them as I'm doing it now. And I know you're aware that our generally comfortable middle class lives, or maybe some of your upper class, I don't know, none of my business, but compared to the sufferings we see around the world, we are leading fairly comfortable lives. Now, in past, that was much harder to achieve because, well, there was barely a middle class 200-300 years ago. There was the merchant class, people that dealt in grain and animal feeds, and would take things to market. But a lot of the rest of us, even before factories came in, we'd be working very hard on the land. And I don't have to remind you what that's like. So we would, most of us, be subjected to the rules and regulations and belief systems of religion. For most of us, that would be Christian, but it might also be Jewish or Muslim. And that would enforce the notion of one life ended by mortality. So there's the limitation that we would buy into when we incarnated. Now, some of us may have had free thinking parents who would say, the hundreds of years where the nascent Protestants would be rebelling against the iron rule of the Catholic Church. But, and good for them. It was a movement toward a relative amount of freedom of thought and practice, but it still didn't include past lives or the notion of karma, that what we were experiencing in our 15th century life might be a partial result of our behavior in the 12th century or even earlier. Now, that's a truth that I think we all recognize now, but when you go to past lives, understand or recall or remember that they're living under a completely different system. Now, I've had experiences, and I know others have, of being a Buddhist monk or a practitioner of the Hindu religion, where reincarnation was taken as a given. So again, that would be something that you could take into consideration. And if you do that, try to, as I've done and others have done, I've discussed this with many over the years, try to, if you've got a past life as a nun or a monk in the Christian tradition, where praying and contemplation and work, selfless work for the community, could be contrasted with your perhaps another life as a Buddhist nun or a monk, where the ideas of reincarnation and karma would be part of your belief system. Now, what parts of these earlier belief systems trickle down into what you're experiencing now is different for everyone. If you were a grain merchant in the 1400s, let's say, and I wasn't, but there are a number of memoirs written by people that could write in that time period. So we know a little bit about the rather, sort of middle class life that grain merchants would lead, and would have a little bit of education, a little bit of practice at the harpsichord or the piano and might be able to discuss theological issues with a liberal leaning pastor. Um, that kind of person is going to feed you in your present life in a slightly different way. And if we go back farther to ancient Rome or ancient Greece, we're going to run into, obviously, ancient Egypt, more pagan belief systems, and where there wasn't just one god, there were several. And the things that were taken for granted were quite different. Now, for example, I think some of you have nature spirits that are in your garden or in your house, or guardian spirits that look after your house in a storm. A lot of us take that sort of thing, even if we don't blab about it too much, like I'm blabbing now. You don't want to upset the neighbors. That comes from not only Rome and Greece, but certainly from there. A little examination of their culture, and there's plenty of writings portraying their culture. They had household gods, they had household spirits, and they honored them. I'm not sure if they prayed to them, but they certainly honored them. And when Christianity became the ruling ethos around 400 AD, that was, kind of pushed to the side, slowly but surely. So we are aware of how, or we can be aware of how pagan belief systems were quite different from the rather strict Catholicism that many of us lived under for hundreds of years. So all of these belief systems do trickle down a little bit into your current life, and you will find yourself, even if you go back 20 or 30 years, seeking out books, modern books, that replicate some of those older style belief systems. And I'm thinking in the early 70s, Carlos Castaneda's books were very, very popular, and they portrayed the belief systems and assumptions of, am I saying this right, a Yaqui Indian shaman from Mexico? And I remember people discussing those fervently in coffee shops and parties on a Saturday night because the books were so popular. And the same with the Seth books. These were strongly, excitedly discussed with their certainly non-Christian outlook. And so I've seen that sort of progress move from then to now. And I've also seen the past life regression movement move on rapidly from the 1980s. And it was, when you look back at some of the books then, they're fairly primitive in their understanding compared to how we see it now. There certainly was not much exploration of the between life experiences, although some of us would look at the old spiritualist books that would be channeling people's lives in the astral and would notice that, hey, how come the past life regression books don't talk about that? And that was a subject of discussion for a few years until eventually the past life regression moved into the between life regression, and we started to, uncover that territory, shall I say. So there's been a lot of progress in, shall I call it, the New Age metaphysical community in those, 40, 50 years. You can find books on regression from the 1920s. There's not many. There's 3 or 4 that I came across. And but you really have to dig to find them. Although I must say, White Crow Books has done a great job of republishing some of these old texts, making them much more easily available than when I was trying to grab a hold of them in, like 1983 or whatever, when you'd have to get an old edition and pay a fair bit of money to get it. Um, so that's another expansion of our understanding. And so, something definitely to be welcomed. Now, higher self. I should get onto that a little more. As the past life regression material went on, more and more regressionists were talking about this being that they would call the higher self or the monad, or any number of other terms. And I got a chapter in this book, You Are History, where I talk about the relationship of the higher self and the incarnate individual and our share of divinity, as I call it. Because certainly higher self is willing, if we are looking carefully, to share its understanding. And in this book, I give a few examples of how other people, other writers looked at it. And I'm talking about people like Charles Ledbetter, Helena Blavatsky, um, more modern writers like Christopher Bach and Jane Roberts. In 1975, in her Adventures in Consciousness, Jane Roberts wrote this. She called it the source self. The source self is the fountainhead of our present physical being, but it exists outside of that frame of reference. We are earth versions of ourselves, beautifully turned into corporal experience. Our known consciousness is filtered through perceptive mechanisms that are part of what they perceive. We are the instruments through which we know the earth. Bruce Moen, who I've referenced quite a bit in my talks and books, he experienced in his meditations and projections the oversoul, much like Robert Monroe, as a disc. And he said in volume 4 of his series, Voyage to Curiosity's Father, for me, oversoul, disc, I there, greater self, higher self, are all words to describe the same thing. Previous explorations have led me to believe I exist as the individual expression of myself. I see this oversoul or disc, a version of me viewing reality from a much broader perspective within the whole of consciousness. And I'd like to quote a little more because he gets into how some members of your higher self or your disc haven't actually ever been on Earth. So let me go to that. The disc oversoul is a separate thing from the Earth life system, exploring the great unknown to bring what it finds there into the awareness of consciousness. Your disc is focused within that portion of the great unknown called the Earth life system. Its members inhabit all levels of this system and gather into the disc all of its unknowns. Some members of the disc have spent their entire existence as consciousness workers, working in the various centers of Focus 27. These members have never experienced lifetimes within physical reality. They are gathering details of the operation of the non-physical control center portion of the Earth life system. They are exploring the infrastructure of the thought form side of the ELS. Some disc members are exploring other thought form sides of the ELS within the various focus levels 22 to 26. Other disc members are cycling through lifetimes within physical reality on Earth, gaining knowledge of that side of the Earth life system. Still, other members of the disc are exploring the ELS connections to other schools outside the ELS, alien worlds, you might call them. I think maybe one older quote would be of interest. From Charles Ledbetter's The Monad, which I think was about written about 120 years ago. The Monad and other essays, you can still find this book. It's in print. We may reverently presume that when we have finally and fully realized that the monad is the true man, we shall find behind that again and yet further a more glorious extension. We will find that the spark has never been separated from the fire, but that as the ego, the higher self, stands behind the personality, as the monad stands behind the ego, so a planetary angel stands behind the monad, and the solar deity himself stands behind the planetary angel. Perhaps even further still, it may be that in some way infinitely higher, and so at present utterly incomprehensible, a greater deity stands behind the solar deity. And behind even that, through many stages, there must rest the supreme over all. So you can see reaching out toward a God figure in that meditation. I think that's less likely to happen these days. But again, Charles Ledbetter was very much a card-carrying theosophist of his time, which would be 1890, 1900s. And that was at a time when, as some of you perhaps know, theosophy and spiritualism were not entirely in agreement about what was important on the inner journey. And one set believed in reincarnation and the other set didn't. And I understand it was a bit of a squabble for 20 or 30 years. And you can check that, but you can also just take my word for it. And so that leads me to looking for something that might sum up how higher self sees us. And let me go to my recent book, Moving Through Many Dimensions. And I think there might be something of use in there. Of course, it's such a darn big book, I have to really look hard to find what I'm looking for. I'm finding all kinds of interesting things here, but not what I'm looking for. I have a channeling here from a being living in 3000 AD and other things like that. But let me go to that. This was a projection of mine in my OBE Journal 2018. And I seem to be interacting with a tall blonde humanoid who looks very much like us, unlike others who definitely do not, like reptilians, mantis beings. And it's very definitely a being from our future. He's smiling and nodding. Yes, I am a being from your future. And I ask, just how far? And he replies, oh, about 3000 AD. I'm not anchored to any one timeline. I said, I see, how exciting for you. He says, I'm going to explain that, don't you? And I said, no, not really. I accept that it's a little beyond my scope, my understanding, to be one of several timelines simultaneously or to hopscotch from one to the other. He said, yes, but you will be able to do it in the future. You will be able to handle that level of multidimensionality as I do now. And I go for that vote of confidence. I'm picking up on his bemused attitude. He's saying, yes, Gordon, you have contacted me before, but you did not remember, and that is why you are here now. I said, surely not just for my benefit. And he said, yes, and also for the others who will be watching. He anticipates any number of my thoughts and questions, and he knows our world will not suddenly transform into a peaceful, opulent paradise in the next 10 or 20 years. Quote, you still have some transitioning to do yet. There are still many areas of strife and destruction around your planet, and for quite a few decades yet. What are those areas? You want to know where they are so you can run away from them? So that's a sort of easygoing. This channeling goes on for several pages, so I won't be stretching your patience by reading any, you know, that that. But I was looking for something on higher self, and I can't seem to find it. Oh, here we go. 308. Okay. Here's an essay called How the Higher Self Sees Us. That's the you that's reading this. That's the you living your life enmeshed in your identity, family, and society. The you that copes and struggles and plays. The you that was born and will die. The you that made plans before arrival and will continue as a spirit in the after of this life. That you is an aspect of higher self, projected from one of the energy matrices on the monadic plane, the ones who arrived here from elsewhere when invited at the ancient onset of Earth development for discrete sentient forms, many millions of years in the ago of linear time. That ago is more or less irrelevant to us as spirits in the spirit realms, where history is swallowed by the reality of non-aging eternity, but is admittedly impressive to us here, seemingly trapped in the lockstep of growth and progress. As a projected aspect of higher self, you are or would seem to be a miniaturized model of a complete being, a holographic representation. Your share of its divine wisdom is there, but rarely immediately apparent, as it is overlaid, veiled, and blocked by the knowledge necessary for the successful navigation of the physical plane, which in the early days was so fraught with pitfalls, predators, and dangers that any kind of survival, however brief, was considered a triumph. This blocking of divine source was intentional, an experiment by planetary designers to create maximum darkness and distance from omniscience, to see just how, quote unquote, humans might cope and learn. As monads thus invited from elsewhere, the likes of Sirius and Andromeda, we were intrigued and wished to challenge ourselves. Well, of course, this little part of ourselves which arrived on the surface as primitive humans soon, if not immediately, forgot all that. We became controlled by fear and convinced by separation. We were the kids that divinity forgot, God's pathetic orphans. Belief systems were built from such foundations and became myths, religions, philosophies, and political economies. So now, when higher self sees us, it sees divine beings lost in belief systems. Systems like democracy, progress, agriculture, manufacturing, worship of prophets and deities. It sees children playing, children frightened and ignorant, children educated and desirous, children mystified and lost in enchantments. It knows the distance between its vibratory level and that of incarnation is so great that the production and avid consumption of sustaining belief systems is inevitable and cannot, in this planetary system, be avoided. It allows for the entanglements thus produced. It waits patiently because it knows our return, despite the entrapment of epochs and cultures, is inevitable, and that we shall re-emerge with the light, becoming once again a knowing wave in the ocean, completely at ease with the pull and push of tides, and utterly uncaring of destiny, achievement, meaning, and immortality. Whoa. So, that seems like quite a mouthful to me. And I'm wondering, should I go on farther? David, have I reached my time?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good time to start the questions.
Okay, thank you for that, because as you know, I get totally wrapped up in my own little speechifying. So please, any questions?
Okay, so I'm going to be the first one. Can you give like a 2-sentence or very simple conclusion of what the higher self is in your own words?
It is who we really are, ultimately. It is the source self. We are projections from higher self. We are, how shall we often say, sparks from the divine fire.
Mhm. Is a higher self also or a collection of all of our past lives?
Yes,
Aspects of it, just a small.
yes.
Is that what you mean by a disc? Where there's a big, like Moen says, a big disc where all of our aspects of all of our past lives are on this disc. The way he
Yeah,
described it, there's a string or there's a cord that comes out of each one of these aspects, and then the cord, all these strings meet together into one gigantic cord and lead into our physical bodies.
yes. Both Robert Monroe and Bruce Moen felt that and experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
All right, thanks. Ellen, your question, please.
Yes. I, some context for the question. I'm an editor and I work with a woman who's from China who has decoded the I Ching basically.
Oh,
uh,
yes.
she's writing something that is sort of along the lines of what you're talking about, Gordon, in terms of um, the uh, the past life and kind of the bleed through of these various different lives. And what I'm finding fascinating about what you're presenting here is that it all seems to be within the confines of the Western construct, that the information that you're bringing through and the sort of the context seems to be totally Western. And I think of China as being such a vast territory. And I'm wondering, is it your belief or is it your experience that perhaps these aspects of ourselves within a particular monad, for example, are contained within a cultural context or within a certain I mean, it feels to me like it's constrained within a belief or construct somehow that I'm fascinated with because of the work that I'm doing with my friend from China. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, it does. I didn't say that today, but because it's my own origins and blossoming into what I've been doing in this life. I'm definitely, I would say, a graduate of the Western mystery tradition, which basically, with inspiration from Atlantis, it began in Egypt and moved through Greece and through mystery schools such as Rosicrucianism and Masonry and various things that people call the Illuminati. And I've experienced that in several lives, and it's very much the Western mystery tradition. And it's not to deny any other one. And they're all equally valuable, I think, given their cultural focus. Just as the Buddhist one has got a very sort of Indian, well, Chinese, Indian, Thai sort of focus. Um, but I do see the connections. But also, I would add that studying and experiencing what I've studied in the last 40 years took up most of my available time. And when I touched on other traditions, like the Jewish one of the Kabbalah, which is a magnificent mystical system, the tree of life and all that sort of a thing, I realized I did not have time to be a Kabbalistic student. I was already enmeshed in too much other stuff. And as you progress on your inner journey, as I on mine, you realize you can respect other traditions, but you can't really become deeply knowledgeable in them because you
Well, this,
haven't got the time.
but this is my question. So does that mean that in terms of our past lives, that we have not incarnated in other cultural
Oh, no, no, not at all.
or,
No, we've
or
incarnated all over the place. There's in that one book I showed you, um, the You Are History, various of my past lives step forward and give their view. And one of them is a Buddhist monk, and another is a Venetian courtesan, another is a poor peasant girl that was thrown out of the farm she was working in because the farmer got her pregnant and she died, got killed behind a pub. There's all kinds of past lives that I can. The 24 that I referenced there were from mostly Western cultures, but that doesn't mean there aren't another 50 from elsewhere. Also, as I say, perhaps beings from Andromeda or Sirius or the Pleiades. Um, and in that book, there were other lives that I did not write about. For example, my current partner and I have strong feelings that I was let's call it a slightly poor Japanese fisherman with a wife and 4 children, and all I did was fish all the time. But when we reflect on that, and it's probably hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we were pretty happy. It was a simple, almost poverty-stricken life, but we were happy. So I didn't write about that, but I have written about other uh, lives, not in that book, because that book was done a few years ago, and then I experienced other things, life in desert situations, one in a Muslim culture where I was tossed out of the tribe for holding rebel beliefs, and I was left to die in the desert with no food or water. And I was wondering at the time in a meditation why I have such difficulty with heat. And summer heat in Canada is not that bad. It's not as bad as in the southern states, but I really don't like it. And that when I asked myself in meditation, what is the source of that? It was lives in India, lives in the African subcontinent in deserts that made me hate hot weather. That may sound like a rather simplistic explanation, but that was and that didn't make it into the book because that was later.
Okay. All right. Daniel, your question, please. Unmute.
Thanks. Well, Gordon, first of all, I just want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
It's marvelous. I think you've sort of encapsulated the leading edge of our thinking in all of these areas. It's sort of a quintessential update or a account of where we've come to as Westerners confronting the metaphysical reality. I think it also, and very importantly, and this is one of the horses I've been riding for a while, demonstrates the limits of terrestrial language. And that the more we study and the more we start getting the bigger picture, I think the more we need to try to I don't know how, except in meditation and so forth, to disengage from the language, to have the language simply be a pointer or a road sign or whatever metaphor you choose, but to become skeptical of the carrying capacity of our language, any earth language, actually, even those, the Eastern languages that are more focused in the metaphysical areas. So yes, but it's what we have to work with here. And I think within those limitations, you're doing a wonderful job. The whole idea of reincarnation not being a linear experience of a particular soul entity, but a more multidimensional sort of expression of a larger, higher self, however you want to term it. I think that answers a lot of questions. And it also squares the circle of, do we incarnate? Do we reincarnate? Do we not reincarnate? But who's we?
Yes.
We kind of gloss over that part.
Who is we? Very good.
Right. So, You know, like the old joke, what do you mean we, white man? Um, so anyway, thank you, Gordon. That's really all I had to offer today. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Dan. And as you said that, I thought of two recent experiences. In one of my favorite cafes, just like 3 blocks away the other day, I sat down, some other people sat down, nice young couple, and the lady of the couple said to me, pointing at her husband's paper cup and her mug of latte, she said, "What do you call this?" And I said, "Oh, it's a paper cup." And they both had coffee, but they were recent arrivals from Spain and are now living in Canada with their children. And we get into this big rap about, the, oh, how shall I say, the incredible complexity of the English language and how it has rules, but we barely follow them. And so again, I was thinking of the limitations of language. And also, just the other day, I was thinking, Dan, and this will up to you. Music and film help us transcend language. Music, particularly, whether it's classical or jazz or whatever, because it communicates to our ears and our hearts in a way that doesn't need language. And also, the most inventive types of film, for example, the Coppola's latest film, which goes backwards and forwards in time and uses all kinds of photographic tricks to convey ideas that I don't think you could put into language. But I was struck by that listening to it. That's not an entirely successful film, but it is visually stunning, and in a way, it creates its own language. So, yeah, as a practitioner of writing and words, believe me, I'm incredibly aware of how limited it is.
Okay,
Thanks.
Christina,
Thanks.
I'm sorry. I got everybody that's like Wendy's got on her screen of Zoom looks different than mine and Gary's, and I got it mixed up a little bit. So I got you mixed up there, Christina. So you go ahead now. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much, Gordon. Very interesting slant on the higher self and the monads. I came across Leibniz or Leibniz, I don't know, about 40 years ago when I studied philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately, hello, this fellow's a mystic, or he's getting into it, because I was a Rosicrucian then and still am. And so we do rather try to skip the lower levels and get into the higher selves, or to aim for the higher self, rather than a lot of the Ouija board type things, and which So I think he was also a mathematician. And you can see that that and the I Ching are actually also based on mathematics. It's a very mathematical thing, and so is the chase for the higher self. If you say, well, what is it? What's your higher self? You can talk about it in terms of physics and psychic mass and an average of what you think you are, or like as a man thinketh, so is he. And I'm sorry, I've lost Gordon. I have found Peg English on my screen, but anyway.
Here I am.
Yeah, that's better. So I'm just thinking, well, the average of what we are, we don't, as a man thinketh, so is he, is really true, but we don't think everything. Like we might think one thing and say another, or act in another way. Now, and as we go along, we go back and forward, and we're never quite the pure thing. And so to me, you take an average of what you are, and that is what you are. Like if you imagine your psyche as a helium balloon, it rises and it only goes to its level that it can go to. others can go higher because they have more of this helium or spiritual kindness or generosity or whatever. So it does become an average, and we have to try and raise that average up and talk to ourselves and say, no, just suppress that feeling. And, what's the loving thing to think about, and until it becomes a habit. So, all right, I've said enough. Now, one thing I'd like to know is the title of that book you were reading from, please. It sounds really.
There's three of them. One's called You Are History, the Soul, the Higher Self, and Our Share of Divinity.
Right, and the author is?
Oh, that's me. That's Gordon Phinn.
It's yours, is it?
Yes.
Oh gosh, can you show me the picture? Show me the book, the front.
Okay. How's that?
Yeah.
Good?
Right. You Are History. Okay, fine. That'll be fine.
Is that the one you were asking about?
Yes. That's the big one. Right. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Carry on. You're doing marvelously.
Thank you. But as you said briefly there, as we try to raise the level of understanding or whatever, and the vibration of the general consensus of people, and I'm thinking you made me think of in a goodly number of the old spiritualist communications from 100 years ago, you will find channeled references. The medium will be talking to a couple of spirits, and one spirit will say, well, I've been waiting for my husband to show up, but when he got here, his vibration wasn't high enough to maybe the word vibration wasn't used. His level was too low and to live on my level. So I have to go down a few levels to visit him, but he cannot come up a few levels to visit me. And I can't tell you the number of times I read that in my studies, 30 odd years ago. And it made me realize that there are levels, and that for people on a certain low level, and that doesn't mean that they have to be criminal or wicked. It just means, I guess, more kind of narrow-minded and stuck to a belief system. It's hard for them to shuck that off and move up a bit. But sorry?
No, go ahead. Someone, I
Oh,
think
okay.
you're muted now. Go ahead.
So you just made me think of that, and I'm glad we've got a Rosicrucian here. Very good, thank you.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
For Christina, I did put a link to Gordon's book in the chat, direct to Amazon. But what I wanted to do is bring in a concept I was made aware of yesterday. I watched a video interview with David Icke. Are you familiar with him, Gordon?
Yeah, I read some of his books years ago, but
Okay.
was disenchanted with how paranoid he made people.
Well, let me toss this out there for
Mhm.
it's not your consideration, for general consideration. He talks a lot about a concept called the trap. And this
Yeah.
refers to the idea that human beings are caught in a kind of illusion or a prison of the mind, an artificial structure designed to limit our consciousness, to prevent true spiritual awakening, and to maintain control over individuals by those in power. Now, you did mention the Illuminati a little bit earlier in your talk, so I want to address that. The elite and the global control structure, like, argues that the small group of elites, whom he often refers to as the globalist elites or
Yeah.
the Illuminati, are behind this control system. But I think
Yeah.
it goes beyond that. Now, what he's saying, as far as the trap is concerned, we're caught in this cycle of reincarnation, and it extends into that realm as well, not just on Earth. So, just like to get your take on that. Is that a real reality, or is that just bullshit?
I think he's misrepresenting the ancient teachings of Gnosticism, which the Gnostics believed that this world was run by sort of demigods. They had another word for it. I can't quite remember what it was. And David Icke is a popularizer. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying he simplifies things too much. And uh, I haven't read anything recent, but I read several of the books from a few years ago and seen a bunch of interviews. In fact, I've got a large book by him on the whole, how shall we say, mystery of 9/11. But I won't go into that any farther. Well, that's too hot a topic. But
No,
anyway,
he's not, just to be clear, he, in his talk yesterday
yeah,
with Jeff Mara on his
yeah,
podcast, he did mention that he got this idea over a period of time. And
yeah,
then recently, and I saw this too, there's a woman who wrote a book called The Trap, and she's on YouTube as well,
yeah,
talking about that. And that they're totally coming from different, they don't know each
yes.
other, in other words.
Well, I think ultimately he's wrong. Uh, the reincarnation is not a trap. We come and go from this plane and back to spirit to learn things. It's an education, and we learn different things all the time. As you know, a 14th century peasant working hard with hand tools, no tractors, basically a donkey or something. Um, he's learning a whole lot different than a 19th century factory worker in a cotton mill or whatever. So there are, and obviously, there are lives where we are rich, lives where we are spoilt, lives where we are um, living like the natives in Hawaii, sort of a paradise kind of life. Um, so to me, it's all about different lessons. And
Well, they're saying we don't need any of this.
well, I think,
And souls were already, okay, perfect, but we
yeah,
somehow came down here and got involved in this trap, and then we can't
well,
get out. But we don't,
yeah,
that's what they're saying.
right. I know I've heard this many times before, and the higher self is sort of a type of perfection coming from other planetary systems. I'm pretty sure I came from Sirius, but we're talking about 50,000 years ago. So the Earth was set up by creator devas, angels, if you like. And I talk about this in my memoir, Moving Through Many Dimensions. I quote other authors, of course, people who are in regular contact with devas. Um, it was set up, and we were invited to come as monads. You want to come to this new planet and check it out? I mean, it was that simple. And nobody said, hey, you got to go here, you got to do this, you got to do that. But some of us took on the challenge, and we came here kind of, like adventurous teenagers or whatever, going, yeah, let's check that out. But once you get into the incarnation, it's tough, especially in the early years when the predators were stronger than we were. And there was a lot of lives where you would be hungry, killed very quickly, and it would all seem kind of pointless. And we've moved on from that, obviously, over thousands of years. And those thousands of years are only on this plane. When you're back in spirit, living in the paradise worlds, there's no thousands of years there, none at all. So they've taken the basic concept of reincarnation to perfect yourself as they've oversimplified it. Yes, we are perfect to begin with, but in order to test our earlier perfection from other planetary systems, this Earth was designed as a much tougher board game. It was much tougher. Our distance from our own divinity through lower vibrations is much greater here than Sirius or Andromeda. For example, there's lots of planets to talk about, not just those. So we took it on as another game to play. But of course, in the middle of that 40,000 year game, we tend to go, oh man, I've had enough of this. And you can actually check out if you want. Nobody's stopping you. Not here, not in the astral plane. And maybe David Icke will actually do that. And he's perfectly free to do it, and so is anybody else. But I favor the other path. I favor going the whole distance just to see what it's like when you're a completed being. And again, I've got a chapter in Movie Through Many Dimensions about the consciousness of a completed being. I hope that answers what you're saying.
Yeah, I might have another question, but someone else can go
Okay.
Yeah.
So
about something.
Sherry, before you go, Sherry, I've got something to say. We've been going an hour, and anybody that has to leave, just go ahead. It's fine with us, and we'll continue with our questions. Just letting people know that Gordon's and with myself leading it, we have a Zoom this Wednesday at it would be 3 o'clock Eastern time. It's all what we've been working on for the past 6 months is retrievals of souls that can't complete the transition over to the other side, and we help them do that. Gordon's been teaching us how to do that. A bunch of I see faces here that have seen that, and I would say, we got a small group, about nine or 10 people, and we're getting pretty good results. 50% of us are getting something. So if you feel like no one participating with us or seeing more, it's this Wednesday at 3 o'clock. That's Eastern time. I'll be leading it, and Gordon will be the speaker. Sherry.
Yes, I wanted to add that in terms of simultaneous lives, Seth used to tell us that we definitely live simultaneous lives, and that those of us who are connected by the same higher self or entity, he called us counterparts. And there was a woman in class whose name was Venice, and Seth explained to her that Venice was a very big woman, and Seth explained that she had a counterpart in China who was very, very thin and hungry, and that he would dream at night of being this woman who was Venice, and it gave him ideas on growing food in his country to feed people. And so Seth said, not only do we have simultaneous lives with counterparts, but we actually, unaware to most of us, interact with them, gain perspective through that information. And it leads to, and thank you, Gordon, this was wonderful, a lot of what Gordon is saying, which is there is so much. To me, I just get like, I just can't even imagine being able to withhold a lot of the experience that I believe is going on other levels, because it's so much. But at the same time, interesting to think that we do have other counterparts living at different times, but now interacting with us on that realm where time doesn't exist. And we might grow or learn or gain through those relationships. It's just fascinating.
Yes, I agree. And I've heard other stories. Sometimes people refer to what you call counterparts as parallel lives. And I've interacted with a number of people, either online or, in discussion groups or email, where they will talk about this, and they have very vivid lucid dreams about these parallel lives where they're, the man that's telling me this is a carpenter, been a carpenter all his life, and then he has these lucid dreams about a very powerful CEO female in either a European or a North American capital who is completely different to who he is. He's very much a do-it-yourself guy. Don't trust anyone else to do something for you. Build it yourself. And she's like constantly making important decisions and going to meetings and, what CEOs do.
So interesting.
Just as one example.
Well, to let people know, Jane Roberts wrote 2 novel books called The Education of Oversoul 7.
Yes.
And then The Further Education of Oversoul 7. And 7 was the oversoul, or the higher self, that managed like 7 different properties. That's why he was 7. And he would also, so then there's the higher self that's coming in to try to help us, as well as the different counterparts were interacting with each other. So if you want a real fun novel that illustrates these ideas, The Education of Oversoul 7 is great.
Oh, I certainly agree. When in my examination of all the Seth books and the Jane Roberts books, I found that to be, and this is like 25 years ago, that The Education of Oversoul 7 to be the most simple and how shall I put it, communicative writing on what an oversoul might experience. It's a
Well,
great
it's very
read.
funny. At some point, Oversoul 7 is told he's got to go into one of his characters, has to literally enter her because she's so messed up. He can't help her out unless he enters in, and he goes, "Oh no, digestion, circulation, respiration.
Mm.
I am not up for that." You know, it's
Mm.
resistant. So very fun books. I highly recommend.
Yeah, me too.
Julia, unmute yourself.
Well, thanks,
Okay.
Dave. My question isn't about David Icke, but I would just quickly comment, following on from Steve. I did attend a mesmerising presentation by David Icke some 25 years ago in London, and I went backstage and had a chat with him. I got very good vibes from him. He was a wonderful person, but I have backed away from him in recent years because I do agree with Gordon. He's perhaps not entirely compatible with the way I'm going now. And in the meantime, I've actually forgot what I was going to ask. Yeah, I think we're all, I suppose I view us all as, you know, infinitesimally tiny, but extremely vital pieces of this unimaginably gigantic cosmic jigsaw puzzle. It does seem that we are aspects of God or the source experiencing ourselves. Do you have any insight, Gordon, into is there a finite number of souls that's going to be produced from the source? And what's the process like when one leaves the source for the very first time, presumably in a pristine, very pure state? How does one decide which planet to incarnate on, and how does some consciousness end up in animals, for example? And there's so much I want to ask you, and I would add to everyone here that in my experience, Gordon is one of the most interesting people on the planet. So,
Well, thank you.
you are Gordon without doubt, and your group is absolutely wonderful. There's so much I could ask, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Well, to pick up on a couple of your points, Julia, I'm convinced that and I write about this in my memoir, the higher self projects some of its consciousness into, usually before being human, into simpler life forms, insects, fish, birds, landscapes, rivers, all sorts of things. And my understanding of that has increased over the years since I've been doing that. And I might also say David Icke, and one runs into people that have either seen a talk by David Icke or read several of his books. I've been running into them for years. And at one stage, I ran into a lady walking in a park who started talking about how fearful and paranoid a David Icke talk had made her. And, you know, I tried to calm her down and said, well, you know, the elite try to control things, but you can always dodge the little sort of darts they throw in your direction. You know, you don't have to play their game. But, you know, anyway, I don't know if that had any help. But I want to tell you something very interesting. In the middle of his number of books, at a certain point, I would reckon 15 years ago, he wrote a book where he talked extensively about taking psilocybin mushrooms and how the high from that made him see the universe as a much more benign and loving place. I don't know if anyone knows about that book, but I noticed a lot of people reading it back in the day. And it was kind of before became trendy as it is now to talk about psilocybin and the health benefits it can provide. But he was very strong on that point of view about how it changed him. So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you for bringing that up, Gordon. I actually wasn't aware of that book, but what I was going to suggest is that simply bringing up David Icke has been an interesting catalyst in this conversation. I'd like to take a brief survey. How many people in our group? I'm watching the gallery view, so I can see most of you right now. How many felt a tinge of fear and doubt when mention of David Icke came up?
I don't know.
Okay, let me just check the other screen here. Okay, that was my one question. The other thing is, aren't the dastardly reptilians themselves evolving?
I think they are from
Gordon?
what I read. Yeah.
Okay, well, there we go. So these relatively unevolved folks are part of our system, along with the deep state and all of the incredible underground conspiracies that affect our lives, in addition to the ones we know about, the wealth rising to the top. It's
Yeah.
all seems to be part of the same package, whether you study or believe in the specifics of the bad guys. It
Yes,
all
indeed.
seems part of
Yes.
the same package here.
I agree. It is part of the same package, and we can't really live without it. Just like, we talk about the destructiveness of wars and the suffering that they cause, and I'm not putting that aside at all. But I think, and I've said this before and written about it, the destructiveness of Mother Nature, as I think our friends can attest, is no fun.
Mhm.
Having your house destroyed by Mother Nature taking a temper tantrum well, at least that's what I think they're doing. Is could it be any worse than that? So,
And you've made a really excellent point, Gordon, in pointing out that we live in the cushiest time in history
oh yes, absolutely,
since, say, the post-war period through now.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I wake up every morning and I thank the universe that
Uh-huh.
I've had, and I think we've all had, and whatever difficulties or rough spots we've had in our life, we've got it good.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no
Mhm.
question. Our post-war boomer thing, and I think most of us belong to that. I see a few younger people at the meetings from time to time, but and certainly some older people who may remember, like my parents raising children in the Depression in Scotland.
Mm.
My elder sisters, not me. So you recognize the tough times that people slightly older than us went through, whether it be wars, depressions, whatever, unemployment, starvation, all that stuff. And us post-war kids, well, boy, did we have a nice time of it.
Right. And not at all to minimize the suffering that's happening as we speak.
Oh no, not at all. No, absolutely not at all. And we have to live with it somehow or other.
Mhm.
And we all find our ways to live with it, don't we?
We do. We do. Making lemonade day by day.
Yes, indeed,
Mhm.
indeed.
Okay,
Oh,
well, that's
thanks,
it.
Dan. I'll make a comment now. And I've been in this afterlife journey for about 5 years, reading everything I can get my hands on, going to every one of these Zooms that I can. And I struggled for years and years. What is this higher self all about? I'd read it. Now I don't get it. I don't get it. Well, finally, I'm starting to get it. And through Gordon. And also, I bought his book, Moving Through Many Dimensions, the new one, which he was reading from today. And that explains the higher self very easy, in very easy terms. I've read it a couple times, and I'm just happy to say that I'm finally getting it. And if you don't understand it, that's a good source to go to. Okay, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks indeed, Gordon, for your presentation. It was very interesting. Um, as far as what I've been given it during my channeling over the last 6 years, is that we all on a unique journey. And during that journey, our paths can cross from time to time as people come into our present incarnation as signposts, if you like. But a lot of them are actually distractions that you don't resonate exactly with the thoughts of others. So you find your own path and you learn what you need to learn in this incarnation. And one guide said that it's just dimension, 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 dimension. And each dimension is only a thought thick. And a different guide said, and I can read it out to you. It's when my time finally comes on this last time on the earth plane, my spirit will join with the energy of everything. I will not exist in any form. I am but a speck, but I am at one with everything. And that speck of everything can become everything. It is only a thought away. And that's going back to 2019, round about this time, which is when I started on my journey. That's it.
Each dimension is only a thought thick. I like that. That was good.
Well, it was a guy that came through and he said his name was Shairi Law. And at 6 years old, he journeyed from Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. And he met 9 masters on his journey to a cave. And he was left in the cave till he was an old man. Just basically thinking about everything. And he actually came through twice. But the strange thing was that he said, when you were younger, and he was talking about me teens, he said, you listened to music. And he says, you listened to the music and you liked the music, but you didn't understand the message. And then during meditation, he came to us not that long ago. And he said, it's now time you've climbed the mountain. I'm going to give you the music. This is your 7th sojourn, and that is the music I give you. Now, 7th Sojourn is the 7th album of the Moody Blues. And they said, when I saw them live in Newcastle, welcome to the people that were there on our spiritual journey through life. And the songs on that album, which is over 50 years since they wrote it, are as real today with today's present situation as it was then in the early 70s. I rest my case. So I think it's quite difficult for people who don't actually communicate with spirits, but want to find out themselves exactly how to do it. And I think once you can do it, once you break that barrier of being able to speak to spirit, then I think it's a whole different ball game. That's when things really start to happen, once you break through that barrier. And the barrier is nearly always within. It's your own self-doubt that you can't do it.
Yes, indeed.
Once you
Absolutely.
break that barrier, then, as you know yourself, things are different. Very much different. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? Come on now. No?
Wendy.
Looks like
Okay.
Steve's next. Oh, sorry, Wendy.
I'm next. I'm next. Sorry. I just wanted to flag to a couple of to people. I don't know if you remember it, but Jürgen Zever in his talks talked about when he was on the higher levels, he could see all of his past lives as a mandala. He could see them all at once, and he could step into one and actually be involved in it as if it was in the present, which I found it's an absolutely fascinating concept. a few years ago, we also had a speaker on this gathering, Tom T. Moore. I don't know if any of you remember him. He wrote a book called The Gentle Way, and I think I've got a link to his talk. It's quite fascinating, and he was talking about that he was immediately aware of 8 different incarnations as himself, 8 different timelines. And he claimed that in one timeline he'd already died, in another timeline he'd divorced and married somebody else, and in a third timeline, it was absolutely incredible stuff. And he's well worth checking out. Tom T. Moore, The Gentle Way. But have a look at that video of him, of his talk, and he's absolutely fascinating. I think we might invite him back again. Now, is Gina still here? Gina had a question that she put in the chat. I
think it was answered.
Oh, it was. Oh, that's great. Okay.
Thank you.
All good.
Thanks.
Steve, are you next?
Yeah,
Yes.
Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, Dave,
Yes.
you're there.
Okay.
I think I was the one that brought you Tom T. Moore.
I think you did. You did. What do you think of him, Steve? Obviously, you must have thought he was something good.
Yeah, he's very interesting. He's got a monthly newsletter as well, so you can go to his website and find out a lot of stuff. People ask all kinds of questions. Anyway, I have a question about Buddhism for our host here, for Gordon.
Yes.
Earlier today, I was doing researches using AI to give synopsises of the various religions. So I did Catholicism, Lutheran, Hindu, and then Buddhism. And I thought, well, we all know Buddhism talks about reincarnation and karma and all that good stuff, just like Hindu. But here's what it says. It says there's no permanent soul. Unlike many religions that believe in an eternal soul, Buddhism teaches the concept of anatta, I guess, meaning no self. I mean, there is no permanent, unchanging self that moves from life to life. What continues is a stream of consciousness or a collection of karmic tendencies that leads to the rebirth of a being in another form. But there is no soul that persists across lifetimes. This kind of blew my mind because it doesn't make any sense, according to what most of us, believe in this group anyway. It doesn't matter what religion you are, except Buddhism, I have thought, believed in an eternal soul, but evidently not. What do you think about that, Gordon?
Well, I've found through my explorations and studies over the years, Buddhism is inclined to, just as much as Christianity, to cling to ancient dogmas without exploring them farther.
Okay.
And I found various things that Buddhists are supposed to believe to be almost laughable. This you're supposed to be in spirit for 49 days before you reincarnate. That's just ridiculous. You can be in spirit for as long as you want. You can be there. It's nothing to do with days at all. And although Buddhism certainly has a lot of value, but you have, like with all religions, you have to sort of dig through the encrusted dogmas and get to the pearls beneath.
Well put.
Sorry?
Well put.
Oh, thank you.
Encrusted dogma. I love that.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's like there's lots of value in the Christianity, but as endless people point out on Facebook, look at all that nutty stuff in the Old Testament about what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do, and rules about food and diet, and oh gosh, it's ridiculous.
I don't even want to talk about Lutheranism, which is what I was brought up in.
Yeah.
It's
anyway.
Crazy.
But there is value in the core of Christ's teachings. I will not deny that.
Of course.
As there is in the core of Buddhist teachings. But the anatta, the emptiness philosophy, I think that sort of relates to, for me anyway, the higher self. The higher self is our original soul being, if you like, and it projects bits of itself, holograms of itself onto the earth or into animals or into uh, nature, trees, rivers, whatever, in order to have that experience in its data banks. And so we're like temporary souls that don't exist throughout eternity, but when we rejoin higher self, which is a little while after we get to the astral plane and reunite with our loved ones and friends and whatnot, and enjoy the pleasures in the astral plane that we enjoy here, but more so, and learn whatever we want to learn, as I've said before. Carpentry, engineering, whatever you want to learn, you can learn it there. And at a certain point, and I'm not going to say when that point is, you move back into the higher self and merge with it. And then you realize that your soul, which was real while it was functioning, is actually just a little part of a bigger soul. I don't know if that helps any, but that's kind of what I feel.
Oh, I believe what you believe. I just thought this Buddhism stuff was a little nutty.
Yeah, well, I've come across it many times over the years, and had to consider it, and think about it, and that's how I've come to it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for bringing up the question of Buddhism and their lexicon. And again, back to language.
Mm.
When the idea of no soul was first articulated, to whom was it being articulated? What did no soul mean in their language in terms of their cultural conditioning and perceptions? Was it an attempt to dissuade people from thinking in concrete terms, like there's this thing called the soul? We don't know. Every religion philosophy is wedded to the context in which it first appeared.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the best reason to not take any formulations seriously. Take from them what inspires you, and read the rest as history, perhaps.
Yes.
Because if we can't perceive our inner truth directly, or move toward an inner place where we're perceiving our truth directly, at best we can regard guideposts as guideposts, as maybe appropriate for their time, for their culture, for their language, for their the political reality at the time. But I think maybe it's because I'm an Ennea type 6, it's known as a loyal skeptic, that I can't resist asking these kinds of questions. How do we know what we know? And I'm enjoying your presentation today, Gordon, because you've expressed things in a language that I can relate to and feel comfortable with.
Okay, well, thank you.
I may agree or disagree with what you mean by the term astral, but that doesn't matter because I'm getting the general picture from you in a way that makes sense to me and feels right. That's all I can say.
Good.
I think Gary has a question.
Well, and not so much a question, but to add to what Dan said, look at the Bible and look at Buddhism and how much has been lost through translation or distorted through translation. So we have to take it with a grain of salt, so to speak, as to what the actual meaning initially was, because it could have been changed by somebody translating it to the English language. So just thought that was a point to bring up. So
could be the dastard reptilians mistranslating our scriptures.
It's always their fault. I think they're running for
they're running. What did you say? They're running for office? What?
Yeah, I think they're running the government too.
Oh,
yes.
Right. Okay, Wendy.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, speaking of Buddhism, it always bothered me, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where they talk about go to the clear light of the void. Do not be distracted by your relatives who come to meet you. Tell them to buzz off. You don't want to be with your relatives. You want to go higher. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, I certainly do. I think we either through duty or love or understanding of karma, that we have a bond of love between us and our relatives in the astral plane. Now, it's not endless, but you have to respect what they did for you in your life. And that doesn't mean, as we know from regression work, some soul friends will agree to play certain roles in our lives ahead of time, and those roles may not be nice or pleasant. If we have, as a soul reincarnating, a tendency to, I'm going to give an example that I've seen many times in books, a tendency to fear and timidity. One of our soul friends will volunteer to be a bit of a bully. No, I don't mean beating us to death with a big baseball bat. I mean bullying psychologically to get us to stand up for ourselves. And that process may take 20 years, and we may not like it very much. But eventually we see the purpose of it. Now, I just give that as an example, an unpleasant example. So I believe that when we get to the astral plane, where the paradise worlds, where most of our friends and relatives are, having a whale of a time, we at least acknowledge our love and debt to them for whatever they've done for us over. Plus, there's just the love of hanging out with them, and but our inner journeys, our meditations, our projections may lead us to know that there are higher levels that we can go to, and that our loved ones there may not wish to go to those higher levels. But what you do, in my experience, and this is what I advise people to do, is, and I've done this in group meditations. You can move to the formless radiant void level and experience that for yourself, and that sort of freedom from personality. For me, that would be a freedom for not being Gordon for a while. And but you can also come back. You can go to those levels and come back. And your relatives that may be hanging out in paradise and enjoying every bit of it might not want to know that you've been to the God consciousness level, or that you've had a quick trip to Saturn or some other planet, as people do. You just tell them you've been on a vacation, and they're like happy to hear that. So there is complexities here that can be worked out in a way that satisfies the adventurous soul, like many of us are, and while relating to the not so adventurous souls that some of our extended family and friends may be.
Interesting.
Thank you. I'm glad you feel that. I mean, we could certainly, explore that at some other time. I have done it in my when I was doing the videos years ago. I was doing them more often than I do them now, and people would follow me from one video to the next, and we'd do a group meditation where I'd have them go to a higher level and talk to their higher self or experience the radiant void, and then come back to the astral level and talk to their family about what they'd experienced, see if A, if they would ask where you'd been, and B, what would you tell them?
Fascinating.
It's an interesting exercise, I'll tell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Julia, would you like to ask your question, please?
I'd like to ask a million questions. Thank you. Gordon, what do you think is our ultimate spiritual destiny? every incarnating soul eventually achieves perfection, which seems highly unlikely at the moment, and we all return to the source, perfected. I mean, what happens next?
Well, if you and your soul group, because each higher self has a soul group, and I think Bob Monroe and Bruce Moen have talked about this, and I think even Jane Roberts, we all have to sort of graduate to that level of higher self before the higher self can move on, or the modad, and that is the soul that we are, that we're part of. My experience and my projection tells me that when you are a graduated soul in the form of the higher self, or when you're part of it, you can either live in a sort of nirvanic existence in the radiant void, or you can check out what it's like to be as a spirit guide or a semi-deity figure in another planetary system where there's a lot of young souls that need guidance. That's definitely a choice that you can make. I've been told that. And so think about that for a minute. You get to be a prophet or something, a mature spirit that some of the younger souls on this other planet will regard you as a bit of a deity. And you probably spend hundreds of years going, no, I'm not a deity. I'm just guiding you. So you get to experience that sort of thing later.
Ellen, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Great. It's really hard for me to language this, Gordon, but it occurs to me, I know you do the rescue work, and I used to do that kind of work. I gave it up. I got very ill doing it, and it just seemed like it was endless. It was like so many.
Right.
But here's what occurred to me during your presentation. I'm wondering, and thank you for it very much. I'm wondering if when we do rescue work, are we potentially interfering with the lesson of a soul that's developing, or some aspect of some soul that's developing? Are we causing some interference somehow?
I don't think it's interference. I think it's checking in on somebody. Just like in this world, you might check in on a friend that's something simple, a bad flu, and you check in with them, and you don't sit too close to them so you don't get it, but you talk to them kindly, and maybe have a cup of tea with them or whatever, and you visit them for an hour, and they're happy that you're there because they can't go to work, and yada yada yada. And so when you're doing something, a spirit contact that might turn into a rescue, you are doing the same thing for a soul that is, confused, lost, as fearful, weighted down by guilt or resentment, all these sort of things that weigh people down. And you're giving them an option. And as I've noticed, I've noticed this for years, but in our Wednesday class, when I'm doing my own meditation while the others are doing theirs, I've had at least 3 occasions where, if not 4, where I'm in touch with a recently deceased soul that refuses my assistance. And I go, okay, sure, I'll check out another time, see you later kind of thing. And so when somebody's got a strong resistance, they don't trust you, they don't want to go on for any number of reasons, you just let them be, and you've just sort of visited them, but you haven't really, if their karma, if you want to call it that, or their learning lesson is to be in, the purgatory levels of the astral and not very happy because, they're angry and they're resentful and they can't give up their attachments to whatever happened in the previous physical life. They have to learn by hanging out there for a while before they can, move up to the next level, which, as we all know, is much more pleasant. So that's their learning. You're not really interfering. You're just giving them an option. And if they refuse that option, well, okay, that's fine. You just leave them be.
Yeah,
Gordon, I want to thank you on behalf of the whole group for a great presentation. And I hope this will spur people to go on Amazon or wherever they buy their books, look at the many books that you have there. They could spend half a lifetime reading books written by Gordon Phinn. And fortunately, long before I knew you personally, I had found your books. So I invite everyone to look into Gordon's books. And thanks again for a great presentation.